Hello, my name is Steve Moyes, and today we're going to look at the origins and meaning of the Lord's Prayer. Luke 11 begins with Jesus in prayer, and this prompts one of his disciples to say, "Lord, teach us to pray, as John taught his disciples." Jesus replies, "When you pray, say, 'Father, hallowed be your name, your kingdom come, give us each day our daily bread, and forgive us our sins, for we ourselves forgive everyone indebted to us, and do not bring us to the time of trial.'" After addressing God as Father, the prayer consists of two divine petitions, "Hallowed be your name" and "Your kingdom come," followed by three human petitions, for food, forgiveness, and protection. The order is significant. We first set our eyes on God, desiring his name to be hallowed or honored, as the Good News Bible puts it, and eagerly desire the coming of his kingdom. This then gives us the proper perspective for asking for our own human needs to be met. The word father, pater in Greek, and almost certainly Abba in Aramaic, is an intimate form of address, though the suggestion that it means daddy has now been abandoned. Jewish sources show that adults also call their fathers Abba. The meaning of "forgive everyone indebted to us" has been debated down the ages. Is it referring to the Jubilee regulations of releasing debts, or is it simply a metaphor for sin? The NIV thinks the latter, and actually translates "forgive everyone who sins against us," which of course agrees with the modern form of the prayer printed in Common Worship. But if we turn to the longer version found in Matthew's Gospel, we find the idea of debt is strengthened rather than weakened. "And forgive us our debts, as we also have forgiven our debtors." Debts and debtors occur in Cranmer's 1539 prayer book, but the 1662 Book of Common Prayer followed Tyndale and the King James Bible and prints "trespass" and "trespasses." However, many of the reformers, including Calvin, thought for social reasons that the idea of forgiving debts should not be lost, and it is present in a number of modern churches, such as the Scottish Presbyterian Church. Perhaps the most significant difference between Matthew's version and Luke's is that we now have three divine petitions matching the three human petitions. Given that Matthew is the most Jewish of the Gospels and is well known for his use of symmetry, it is of interest that there is a Jewish prayer known as the Kaddish, or Holy Prayer, which has the same three types of divine petitions. "Magnified and sanctified may his great name be in the world that he created, as he wills, and may his kingdom come in your life and in your days and in the lives of all the house of Israel, swiftly and soon." Is Matthew responsible for the symmetry of the three divine and human petitions, perhaps influenced by his prayer or one like it? Or did Jesus give the prayer in two different forms? After all, the context of Luke 11 is quite different from the context of Matthew 6. If Jesus knew this prayer, it is of note that he's reduced it to its essence with simple statements about God's name, will, and kingdom. Returning to Matthew's version, we also note that the simple Father has become our Father in heaven, and there is an additional clause on the third human petition to rescue us from the evil one. Our Father makes the prayer more suitable for the church to say, and comes as a surprise in Matthew, since Jesus has just told them not to pray in public, but to go into a closed room and pray in secret. This may be a clue as to how the two versions of the Lord's Prayer arose. When Matthew and Luke got to the point that they wanted to include the Lord's Prayer, they simply inserted the version they were familiar with from their own churches. This is, of course, exactly what we do when printing service sheets, making sure we use the form that the congregation are used to. "And do not bring us to the time of trial," pyrasmos, "but rescue us from the evil one," poneros. As printed in the NRSV, the final protection clause looks very different from what we say in church. This is not due to liturgical developments, but three translation choices made by the editors of the New Revised Standard Version. The first is the verb, which was rendered "lead us not" in the King James Bible, and is also the reading of the RSV and NIV today. There is not much difference, however, to "do not bring us." The second is the noun peirasmos, which can mean temptation, test, or trial. Some feel that the English word temptation is now too weak, like giving up chocolate for Lent, and that we need a stronger word. Thus the Revised English Bible has, "and do not put us to the test," and the Good News Bible, "do not bring us to hard testing." However, if we take our cue from Jesus' temptations in the wilderness, we see that the word can have a strong meaning, and many would prefer not to change it. Thirdly, as well as opting for the word trial, the NRSV takes it as a reference to the final climactic struggle with evil, rather than the trials and tribulations of this life. Such an eschatological view is certainly possible in the light of the apocalyptic passages in the Gospels, but the NRSV is virtually alone in doing so here. There is not much difference between rescue and deliver, but the NRSV, along with most modern translations, takes porneiros in a personal sense, the evil one, rather than the abstract evil of the King James Bible. Grammatically, the Greek could be either. It is a matter of interpretation, and most modern versions prefer evil one. The other major difference between the prayer that we say and the New Testament is, of course, the kingdom, the power, and the glory clause. This is found in the majority of the medieval manuscripts of Matthew, and thus came to be printed in the King James Bible. However, it is not present in our earliest manuscripts of Matthew, and almost all scholars agree that it was not part of the original text. It is not said in Roman Catholic churches. The evidence of the 2nd century work known as the Didache is important here. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done, as in heaven, so also upon earth. Give us today our daily bread, and forgive us our debt, as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into trial, but deliver us from the evil one. For thine is the power and the glory forever. Pray thus 3 times a day. The command to pray the Lord's Prayer 3 times a day indicates how important it has become, both for personal spirituality and corporate worship. Jewish prayers tended to end with a doxology, and here we have a twofold one, for thine is the power and the glory forever. It is generally thought that this has been borrowed from 1 Chronicles 29:11, which effusively speaks of the greatness, the power, the glory, the victory, and the majesty. However, the author or compiler of the Didache clearly thinks it comes from Matthew, and so it must have been added at an early date. Although some exegetical questions are dependent on the details just discussed, some can be asked of all the different versions. For example, what is the significance of calling God Father? Perhaps the Gethsemane story is the most illuminating here. As Jesus experiences distress and agony, he falls to his knees and cries out, "Abba, Father," and we are invited to join him in this intimacy. As John's Gospel will later put it, "On that day you will know that I am in my Father, and you in me, and I in you." It is of course true that those who have had abusive or uncaring fathers will find such words difficult to say. For them, it may be better to generalize and speak of sharing Jesus' intimate relationship with God, rather than focusing on fatherhood. What exactly are we praying for when we say, "Your kingdom come"? A popular view in the 19th century was the betterment of society through the spread of Christian morals. This was effectively demolished when the so-called advanced countries went to war with each other. This led to the apocalyptic view that it is not us who bring in the kingdom, but God, and he will do so in a final cataclysmic event. However, it is hard to see how this is something we should be praying for. Others look to passages like Romans 8, which talks of all creation being redeemed or set free from its bondage to decay. Your kingdom come does not mean being plucked out of this world and taken to heaven, but participating in its renewal. As Tom Wright is fond of saying, We are praying for that time when earth and heaven will come together and all things be reconciled to him. Another question that has led to much discussion is the extent to which God forgiving us is dependent on our forgiving others. What if the person who has hurt us shows no remorse, making it extremely difficult to forgive them in any real sense? Will our suffering be compounded by God withdrawing his forgiveness from us? The answer is probably to refer back to my first point. Our relationship with God is personal rather than transactional. The person who is unwilling to forgive others has not understood the depths of God's love and their own need for forgiveness. But such a God will understand that it takes time to heal, just as he understood that Jesus required 3 wrestlings in prayer before he had the resolve to go through with the cross. Lastly, there has been much discussion as to why we need to pray for God not to lead us into temptation. Surely he would not do such a thing anyway, so why does it need a special petition? The problem is not new. James wrote, "No one, when tempted, should say, 'I am being tempted by God.' For God cannot be tempted by evil, and he himself tempts no one. But one is tempted by one's own desire, being lured and enticed by it." It is unclear how this squares with the Old Testament, where it specifically said that God tested certain individuals, such as Abraham. Reading between the lines, it looks like James is castigating those that try to use this as an excuse for indulging their own appetites. God was testing me, they say, so I am not to blame. James is having none of it. Many commentators draw on Paul's principle in 1 Corinthians 10:13 to explain this petition. God is faithful, and he will not let you be tested beyond your strength, but with the testing, he will also provide the way out so that you may be able to endure it. On this view, lead us not into temptation means do not take us beyond what we can bear. It is interesting that in 2019, Pope Francis suggested that the wording should be changed to do not let us fall into temptation, though this is yet to make it into any printed edition. There is one final point that you would never have guessed was a problem from our English versions. I am referring to the petition, "Give us today our daily bread." The problem is that the word translated daily is epiousios and is completely unknown. Whatever Jesus said in his native Aramaic, someone decided that no existing Greek word could quite capture its meaning, and so made one up. There have been 3 main suggestions for its meaning. First, give us today the bread we need to exist. Following the Latin Vulgate, Wycliffe used substance, that is existence, to bring this out. In the medieval period, this was commonly understood as a reference to the Eucharistic bread. Second, give us today the bread to come, a reference to the heavenly banquet that figures in some of Jesus' parables. The meaning would then be, let us experience something of the world to come. Third, give us today the bread for tomorrow, an allusion to the manna miracle, where the people of Israel could only collect 1 day's worth of food. The emphasis would then be on trust for God's provision. Most modern translations have settled on daily, following Tyndale and the King James Bible, though bread is generally taken as metaphorical for the nourishment we need, and could therefore be taken as either physical or spiritual, or indeed both. I close with a version of the Lord's Prayer found on the Church of England website. Thank you for watching.
Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name.
Thy kingdom come.
Thine will be done, on earth as it is in heaven.
Give us this day
our daily bread.
Forgive us our trespasses,
as we forgive those
who sin against us.
And lead us not into temptation,
but deliver us from evil.
For thine is the kingdom, and power and glory, forever.